not sick anymore. Actually, I wasn't even coughing. I had a throat I couldn't swallow. Hi, it's Timmy Joe. Well, back from a hiatus of feels like a long time, but you know, I make videos like every other day. So when I take 4 days off, it's like this is a video about this guy though. So let's stop talking about that. I make videos about computers on the internet. This would be a pretty nice graphics card, actually. It's GTX 970. Maxwell's mid-tier, and you probably want to know, is it still a good gamer in 2017? Is it still good value? You could pick one up during the game apocalypse. Probably not a very good card for mining, so if you can get a hold of one for gaming, probably be a pretty good deal. So cue the intro, stay tuned to the end of the video, watch the things and stuff. I did a lot of benchmarking and, you know, some research. We're gonna talk all about it. Alright, here we go. So, we first saw this card in my intern Terran's, that's a not a way to say it, Terran's PC. He had a Core i7 system, brought it over, it was very gross, very dusty, and inside of it was this pretty nice little graphics card. He even brought me the box, so it looks all official and shit. So, I've seen a lot of these, you know, this cooler style over the while, and when I saw this one, it kind of got me weird and worried that maybe it looks to me, because my brain, has seen a lot of these with way too beefy a cooling setup on it, that this one might like not perform well or something. It was weirding me out. So it doesn't have backplate, which is like pretty much any video card these days has a backplate, like even like 1050s. So to see a 970, which would have been a pretty expensive graphics card at the time, not have one, it kind of makes you think it's cheap. Also, case in point, let's see here. I've seen this is a RX 580. I actually have the box for it here that I stole when I did a build for Computer Doctors. This is in a PC over there, and it's an RX 580 with a 3 heat pipe solution and a backplate, and not necessary, because the RX 580, like the Polaris GPU on it, doesn't get very hot. So it's, you know, mediocre, but it only has one 8-pin connector. So you can see this actually takes an 8 and a 6. So you would think that this would need a beefier cooling solution, but it doesn't actually get that hot. It's not bad. So yeah, I plopped it in my i7 test bench. Got to work on some benchmarks, and checking out the specs here. It does pretty freaking well, actually. What's the, let's see, OC mode? The, what's this thing supposed to pump out? Well, 1278 megahertz boost clock. Well, it actually, its stock goes about 1309 with GPUs, probably 2.0 on that one. So it's the cooling solution on it's like pretty good, and it'll overclock even higher than the box says just right out of the box. So I was generally seeing 1309 without doing any overclocking or anything on an open air test bench. So that's pretty cool. So what were we benching? What were we doing here? Whoa, I pressed the wrong button. There we go. I got all kinds of games we tested out, and at first I was gonna see if this thing could 1440p. And I quickly kind of stopped, because aside from a few games that just, perform pretty well with hardware like this, like Doom and Prey, the rest of them were struggling, where I'd have to go to like medium or lower settings to get over 60 frames a second. Some games that wouldn't even be attainable at 1440p. So I kind of left 1440p alone. If you had a 1440p monitor, you could, in certain games, especially esports titles and stuff like that, CSGO, Rocket League, you could play this at 1440p all day long and get some really nice frame rates. But if you're looking for a card for 1440p, you're probably looking for this guy's big brother or one of the newer generations of cards, because it's just it didn't do good at 1440p in my opinion, especially since I've been so spoiled lately. So let's go over these benchmarks real quick, rapid fire succession style. So starting from the bottom of this list, because I don't know why my list got inverted. Doom OpenGL. Okay, I tested Vulkan in OpenGL, and with every single setting cranked, 1080p, we got 113 OpenGL, 116 Vulkan respectively. The very smooth experience. You could almost run this all settings cranked on a 144 hertz monitor. Almost. Maybe turn down a few things in Vulkan Doom, and you could get some pretty awesome experience with this. So, moving on to Rise of the Tomb Raider, every single freaking setting cranked. DirectX 11 and 12 in these. I wanted to see if on the older Nvidia GPUs, if DirectX 12 was helping it yet, because if you run any sort of AMD card, you generally get a lot better performance in DirectX 12. It's the opposite with Nvidia cards. Well, wanted to see if maybe some driver optimizations had made DirectX 12 be better for older Nvidia hardware. We'll see across the board here, that's not true. Okay, stick to DirectX 11 if you run an Nvidia card. So, Rise of the Tomb Raider, we have 67 and 67.5 of DirectX 11. Pretty good score. Every single setting, and that's using the benchmark, of course. But, I like to use that because, then you can go run it on your system and kind of compare the results. Battlefield 1, I always run the opening sequence with all the crazy stuff going on. And in DirectX 11, every single setting turned on 78.7 frames a second, doing really, really well. So it was worse by almost 8 frames a second with DirectX turned on. So Prey, over 100 frames a second, 116.4. That is wonderful. GTA with every single setting cranked, like all the anti-aliasing on and stuff like that, didn't do so well, 47.3. But if you move MSIA back one block, and there's like another one, you move one block, you alter 2 settings, and we're over 60 frames a second. So there's just a few settings of overkill GTA stuff you'll probably never notice that you can move back just a smidgen, and you can run over 60 frames a second, max graphics 1080p on this card. The Witcher, another one where we stuck with DirectX 11 in this, but all the settings turned on. This is a game that taxes video cards, and 47.6 frames a second, all the settings turned on. I had to mess with some stuff to get what I would call the playable, like all-time, decent experience in The Witcher at 54.7 frames a second, and that was turning Hairworks in half, anti-aliasing in half, just a few settings down, but that's just a Witcher thing. You need a really crazy graphics card to turn all the settings on, and no matter what, if you just turn a few things down, it still looks really good at 1080p. Pretty nice looking game. So, moving on to my second page of benchmarks from the bottom, Crysis, maxed out. Still a game that can tax a card from last generation if it's not the best one. 47.2 frames a second. Overclocked. So I overclocked the card, and I actually ended up getting another 11 frames a second in Crysis for some reason. It was weird. So going back and forth here, just overclocking the card, I got a pretty good, almost an 11 frame per second jump in Crysis, which is pretty cool. So I kind of tested some different things to try and get the frames up there near 60, and just overclocking the card got me pretty close in Crysis. Deus Ex Mankind Divided with not every single setting on, but MSIA times 2, because if you put everything on, it'll actually make this thing run at like 8 frames a second at 1080p. But if you put it to like the kind of nearest of high settings, it still will really beat this card up, 34.7 frames a second. But if you play with it a little bit and go to a medium, you can get over 70 frames a second, and the game looks just as good. So, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, a game you can run this and still look pretty good, but it's not one of those games where you're going to max all the settings out on a card like this. Ghost Recon Wildlands on Ultra, 34 frames a second, and we had to switch to the very high preset to get near 60 frames a second. So with a few other tweaks, to get 60 frames a second would be pretty attainable, and you're still in the high realm of settings. Sniper Elite at DirectX 11. I just stopped testing DirectX 12 at this point because we kind of always knew the result. All the settings cranked, was getting 76 frames a second, so really good result. And everyone's favorite, PlayerUnknown Battleground, one of those games where I like to have 60 frames a second and like to turn all the graphics on. A lot of people just set the graphics to like very low so that, their system isn't impeding. But I'm not that kind of guy. I want all the settings cranked. I want the best of the best. So we were 56.7 frames a second. Very good score for this on very high in PUBG at 1080p. So good for you. Very close. But I thought, let's overclock the card and we'll see what the average is. Well, it raises up over 60. So there are definitely those weird dips. It's a CPU intensive game. The i7 I was using on this test bench, it really helps to get the frame rates in PUBG, but having a good video card is a must, and 61 frames a second, you can break the 60 frames per second barrier with this card in PUBG. So let's talk a little bit about the overclock ability of this card. So it starts off at 1316 megahertz, sorry. And that's just GPU boost, not touching any settings. There might be something you can download from MSI to put it in an overclock mode or whatever, this and that. Out of the box, without me just with me just putting the Nvidia driver on, it was doing 1316 with an effective memory clock of 3506. And using MSI Afterburner and a little tweaking, I put 200 megahertz on this puppy. And it was happy to do it. And I put another 400 on the memory. And it increased performance quite a bit. It was a noticeable improvement in performance when the performance was actually already there. I didn't test most of those games with overclocking. I only did it when performance was a concern close to 60 frames a second. So pretty cool stuff. And if you want to see how that translates over to some score results, well, here's 3D Mark Firestrike before and after the overclock. But we'll see here the graphics score goes from 11,811 before the overclock all the way up to 13. So we got about 1,800 score, 1,600 points up. So it's pretty good. All right, so I got a little conclusion for you. I like this card. First impressions led me to believe that it might not be as fast, especially considering like I had a 770 back in the day and I always kind of was disappointed at the performance, but this is a whole generation older and a whole other architecture older, and it really actually is a pretty freaking awesome card. It's a little hot rod. I'd actually have a little simile for you here, okay? The 9 series in general, but the 970 specifically, is like a base model C6 Corvette, okay? A 2005 C6 Corvette. If you look at this picture, it looks like it's kind of showing its age a little bit. But if I were to put you in this car and let you drive around in it, you'd be like, holy jeez, that's a freaking fast car. It's got a V8 engine. And then like the 980 might be like the turbocharged, like the ZR1 version of the C6 Corvette. But the problem is the 10 series is out now, and it's more like this, okay? The C7 Corvette. A whole brand new experience. If you were to get in a C6 Corvette, it's kind of got this cheapo, like, Corvette feel to it. This, like, Chevy feeling, 2005 era, gonna go bankrupt Chevy feeling to it. But when you get into one of these, like the 1080 Ti, and there's like a dashboard computer, and you can change the stiffness of the shocks and the quick shifts, just it's a whole other world these days. But for 1080p, this card is pretty freaking awesome, and I would recommend it. If you can pick one up for like $200 to $250, $275, you'd be laughing. And I'd say it's still gonna play a hard game against a 1060 or a RX 580, 4 gig or 3 gig respectively. This being a 4 gig card, the memory on it's actually kind of getting up there for like the high end of gaming. But it will still do a very good job of playing 1080p games, and there'd be no reason to upgrade unless you're really looking to upgrade your monitor, or you want to play those latest titles at like 144 hertz. I'm out watching me doing Instagram and Twitter. I have a contest trying to get to 20,000 subscriber guys. Past 15,000 recently, so we're getting there. It's pretty cool, pretty close. Try and hit that 20K by the end of the year, and things are just gonna start to snowball. Hit subscribe on the channel. I'm gonna stop psycho-babbling about an old card and calling it a sports car. But yeah, it's the GTX 970, the Corvette C6 of today's video cards. See you guys in another video.